I've been listening to a lot of older video game soundtracks recently, and it got me thinking to a topic that I'm pretty sure anyone over the age of about 19 or 20 has discussed. Video games just aren't as good as they used to be. The most common counterpoint I hear to that particular statement is that they only seemed better because of nostalgia. So I thought I'd sit down and make a video examining old games and try and figure out, do I still enjoy playing these more than I do more modern ones? Or is it just that I have great memories of them? A thought that quickly occurred to me, of course, is that when I was younger, my gaming was much more pure. I'm a recent college graduate, so I'm not exactly making a great deal of money. In fact, I spent most of the last 5 years trying to spend as little as possible. Even though I work full-time now, even something as much as $20 tends to give me a lot of pause before buying it. It was like that through most of college as well, so making the decision to buy a new game was pretty big. When I was younger, though, I didn't have to worry about getting through school without being in debt, or figuring out how to spend my free time once I got off work. All I had to worry about was what I was going to do after school. Should I play one of my one-player games, or invite a friend over and play something two-player? I didn't have to worry about competing against the entire world just the dude down the block. Every time I made some accomplishment, I actually felt very good about it because I wasn't being told that 5 million other people hadn't also done it, and had done it better and faster and before me, and no one gives a shit. Now, in terms of trying to compare old versus new video games, when I presented the concept to Sate, he sent me back an email that I think pretty much sums up some of the best points on the conversation. The truth of old games versus new games is similar to what you've talked about in your gamer mentality video. I think you need to have played the games then to truly appreciate some of the differences. The essential difference is that back when we didn't have online, so no community and no ability to give up if a game was too hard, this was an important one because it really drove people to think harder and to problem solve a lot better. If a puzzle got put into a game that you couldn't figure out, often it simply meant that you stopped dead there for weeks or months, and that was okay! When you finally figured it out, it was very rewarding, but it also meant that sometimes you just never figured it out. Fast forward to the land of the internet and a massively increased gaming industry, and it's an entirely different story. Games must be fun and challenging, yet cannot be too difficult. Do that, and people can pick up any one of hundreds of other games. It's a different economic model incentivized in much different ways. Even I can't appreciate or invest as much time in those puzzles these days because I have better options. So I think it's important to appreciate that although the games are static, our technology, community, and available alternatives are much different. I think a real-life analogy would be something like an old person who used to watch black and white Batman on TV. While we can still find recordings of it and watch it these days, the advancements in technology and available alternatives make doing so laughable and easy to criticize. With that in mind, I'd like to share with you a handful of games I had growing up, and why I still enjoy going back to play them. And when you're done watching the video, I'd like to hear your thoughts on old school versus new school. So feel free to comment. First, let me start with a couple hack and slash games that were basically arcade ports to the Genesis and Super Nintendo. Some more modern versions of hack and slash would be the Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance series, or more obviously the Diablo series. But before those games, we had ones like Knights of the Round, Streets of Rage, Final Fight, or these two, Golden Axe and King of Dragons. Golden Axe was a pretty straightforward hack and slash game that was all about manipulating enemy position to your advantage. You could only really attack people in the same horizontal plane as you, and enemies would often try to get around you to trip you up as a result. King of Dragons was the first hack and slash game I played that had a leveling up system. You got stronger weapons and armor, more hit points with every enemy you killed or item you picked up. It gave a double sense of progression, since you'd legitimately grow more powerful as you progressed through the game. Also, it has one of my favorite boss fights from any game. These wraiths circle around you and constantly move from side to side, so you have to try and take swings at them while remaining inside the circle. Another one that I must have sunk many hours into was Road Rash. Why is this game awesome? This is why. I haven't even left the starting line, and the first thing I do is lean over and bitch slap this guy off his bike. It was such a satisfying experience, I would often slow down when in the lead just to beat the shit out of people. Especially when you jack some dude's club. I played Mario Kart on the Super Nintendo as well, but reaching over and clocking someone on a motorcycle was somehow much more satisfying than shooting bananas and shells at everyone. Road Rash is the first game I ever played to introduce a racing game that was much less about racing and more about beating the shit out of everyone else on the track. If you played Final Fantasy Tactics and enjoyed it, let me show you a game that came out far before it. Shining Force 2 was not the first of its kind, in case the 2 in the title wasn't obvious enough, but it was the first strategy game of its kind that I played. I think this pretty much speaks for itself. Oh, Super Mario World. I'm pretty sure of all video games I have ever played in the last 20 years, I've played through and picked up 100% completion of this game more than any other. Not only did it introduce the character of Yoshi, who's just a bad motherfucker, but it was the first SNES game most people played. And compared to the Mario games of the NES, holy shit, these graphics were amazing! I was astounded by the visuals of this game every time I played, and it still remains challenging in certain levels. On the subject of platformers and graphics, how about Donkey Kong Country? This was the first game I had ever played that made use of all the 3D models you see, and if Super Mario World was eye candy, this was a visual orgasm. It was also a pretty fun platformer, and again, sometimes very damn hard. You know what the kicker of this level is? There's actually a secret to just skip over the whole thing. Of course, it wasn't the first 3D game I ever played. I think that honor belongs to Star Fox, which really pushed the limits of the SNES console at the time. Also, you know what one of the most awesome moments in video game history is? The opening of this level with its music. Holy fuck, Star Fox had some amazing music. I still go back and listen to the Space Armada track from time to time. This game was just all kinds of badass. Now, a game that was very near and dear to me for a long time was a cartridge combination of Dr. Mario and Tetris. Tetris was one of the very first games I ever played, and it was the only game I ever really played with my parents as a kid. My dad whipped my ass in it for about 3 years straight, and when I finally beat him some years down the road, it was a very proud accomplishment. Of course, my favorite version of Tetris is actually one for the Nintendo 64 called the New Tetris, but it'll take me a while to explain why. Suffice to say, however, that Tetris is one of my favorite games of all time. It is the defining game of the fast-paced puzzle genre. Finally, a couple adventure games. First, Secret of Mana. Secret of Mana was the first RPG-ish game that I'd played that had a combat system where you could see all the enemies and dodge attacks, and it was all about the movement. It was kind of like a much faster-paced Zelda with 3 characters and magic attacks and a much more involved storyline. And since I mentioned Zelda, my personal favorite in the series happens to be Link to the Past. In all fairness, I never played the Game Boy Zeldas, or Majora's Mask, or Wind Waker, or really any of the newer ones except Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess. But none of the Zelda games had me come back and play through them again to the extent Link to the Past did. But it's hard to compare all these games to more modern ones. Like Sate said, it was a different time, a different culture, a different mindset of gaming. Video games were just kind of a subset of nerddom, not really something in the public eye like they are now. And a lot of them were based in fantasy settings or involved escapes from realism. Racing games were about holding the gas pedal the entire time, not designing the spoiler on the back of your car and perfecting your drifting. Sports games weren't about making team rosters and carrying your fantasy self through 4 years of college. And games were typically more about story than flashy graphics and explosions. I think some of us may legitimately long for the golden days of video gaming because we simply like the games that came out more than we do the ones that came out now. But to argue that they are fundamentally better is just apples and oranges. Or maybe lots of bananas.